Hello everyone. On Wednesday, February the 17th, the season of Lent begins. And as always, it begins with Ash Wednesday. We here at Nativity of Our Lady will be celebrating two liturgies on that day. One at 9 o'clock in the morning and one at 6 o'clock in the evening in our pavilion. Because of the limitations imposed on us by the pandemic, we have prepared individual disposable dispensers with ashes within them. During the liturgy, we'll bless them, and at the conclusion of the liturgy, we'll distribute them to you. We'll invite you to take them home and to sign yourself or your family system. Because the ashes are blessed, we would encourage you not to just rinse them down the drain, but rather to bury them in your garden or in your backyard, and then you can dispose of the dispenser in the recycling bin. Because Lent is really a time of prayer, of reflection, of almsgiving, of fasting, we always want to provide some special nourishment for you during this time. So to that end, we are preparing to distribute to you various different filmed reflections and meditations based on a collection that Father Jim prepared many, many years ago. Father Jim, myself, Deacon Tom, and a variety of our different lectors will be filming each one of these reflections on the stations. Some weeks you'll get 2 in your email, some weeks 3. And of course, they will always be on our parish website as well. I would encourage you when you receive them to make time spiritually, light a candle, turn off your phone, and give that 15 minutes to reflecting on this great journey. And here to tell you a little bit more about the history is Father Jim.
I'd like to take a few moments and tell you about the history of the devotion we know as the Stations of the Cross. Originally, as you know, the Jews maintained going to Jerusalem as a pilgrimage they would do, depending on where you lived, on all the different feasts of the year. And if you lived at a further distance, you'd go to fewer feasts. If you lived like far away, as today, if you live in the United States, Jews would hold in their psyche the promise that one day they would actually go to Jerusalem for Passover. But for them, this was the big pilgrimage. And remember that all the early Christians were Jewish. So as the community began, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem was part of their yearly cycle. So they would go every year to Jerusalem for Passover. As the Christian community became more and more Christian, and began to move away kind of from the Jewish thing, people who would go to Jerusalem for their Jewish celebration would simultaneously visit the sites that had been important to the life of Jesus. And so they'd go see the temple, and certain things are kind of obvious. Where Jesus was condemned is called the Antonium. The ruins are very obvious there. The temple's very obvious. Garden of Gethsemane is obvious. The place where the Holy Sepulchre is obvious. Pool of Siloam. There are a lot of different places that they could visit. And what people would do was when they visited these places, they would keep diaries. And there was no one writing guidebooks at the time. But if you were going to visit Jerusalem, you would probably look at the most popular guidebook, the most popular diary of someone who went there at the time. As a result of that, the number of Stations of the Cross has been as few as 5 and has been as many as about 25 over a period of time. It's evolved according to the different stations. Another fact that was going on in the development of the stations is there was a real desire on the part of the community to somehow embody the very teachings of Jesus, so that the stations become illustrative of the different teachings of Jesus. And it's led to some stations being made up and added that way. But as much as possible, most of it comes from the scriptures. And they set it up that way. And the sites, over a period of time, kind of became defined. During the Crusades, one of the things that happened was that the city of Jerusalem, at times you could visit there, and at times it absolutely couldn't. But if you remember, in the early days, people were very, very interested in pilgrimages. And we have famous pilgrimages that we know of to our own day of Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela. But as a result of that, what they did, the Pope looked at the idea that Christians could not go to the Holy Land at certain points, and they wanted to do this pilgrimage. So what the Pope did was order that that pilgrimage be put into every Catholic church. There are a couple of things that are interesting about that. Matthew would probably be able to tell you whether or not they're rules today. I know it's difficult for most of you to see this when you look at us, but Matthew's actually a little younger than me. And when I was going through the seminary, there were a couple things that were required. During the Crusades, the only people who really seemed to be interested in everybody were the Franciscans. And there's even a legend that Francis himself was over there. But when the thing was finally settled, that they were firmly in the hands of the Muslims, the only Catholic clergy allowed over there were Franciscans. So they became in charge of all the churches and everything. And the Stations of the Cross represent now 14 chapels that are administered by the Franciscans. So again, when I was in the seminary, if you put Stations of the Cross up in a church, they had to be put up and sanctioned by a Franciscan. It could be a priest or a brother or whatever, but it had to be a Franciscan. And secondly, every station had to incorporate a wooden cross, so that if you go into some of these great churches in Europe with great mosaic stations, look around carefully, you'll find a wooden cross somewhere in the station. I don't know whether those two things are still required or not. But anyway, the stations were set up that way, and people would go around, visit the stations. In order to fulfill the devotion, there's really only two things necessary. One is that you actually walk around. Now, if you're in a crowded church, then normally they'll have altar servers or someone carrying a cross or something walk it. But there needs to be the walking, because it is officially a pilgrimage. And when you finish, you need to say prayers for the intentions of the Holy Father. That's important to the thing itself. But whether you stop at the stations, whether you acknowledge them individually or anything, is not the issue. It is, in fact, a pilgrimage. Part of the interest of it for me personally is in my parish in San Diego, a priest came from somewhere on the East Coast who painted them, and they're a fresco that go around the church. And it was being painted while I was a little kid going to school there, and we'd sit and watch it and stuff. So it's a very strong devotion. It was then increased for me when I began to study scripture in the seminary. And then once I actually was ordained, I've gone to Jerusalem at least once a year in the entire period where I was pastor and administering parishes and everything. And so the devotion became a very, very powerful thing in my life. I'd like to read a quote to you from the Gospel account of Luke, which I think is very significant. This is chapter 21 and verse 12. But Jesus is now talking to the apostles. He says, they will capture and persecute you. I rate this to Jesus, that he was arrested and scourged. They will summon you to synagogues. Remember, Jesus went to be judged by the high priest. And prisons. They'll bring you to trial before kings, that would be Herod, and governors, which is Pilate. He says, all in my own name. If you notice there, when Jesus gives us the warning, the description is exactly his passion. And I think one of the things to understand about this, in some mysterious way, the passion of Jesus is our passion as well. And the things that are taught there are things we need to know and become a part of our spiritual life as time goes on. And the real purpose of the stations is to enrich our lives for our daily dealing with the trials you and I have every day.
I'm excited that we're going to be able to bring these reflections and meditations to life for you, and I hope that you'll enjoy them. It's my great hope that the Lenten season will always be a time of great spiritual growth and insight. So I hope you'll join us as we celebrate the Stations of the Cross throughout Lent. Join us on Sunday, during the week, whether in person or live stream. Join us every single day as we continue this great adventure in which we seek the God who lives amongst us.